Welcome to r/payback, where a shocking betrayal by neighbors. When I finally became a homeowner, it felt like stepping into a dream I'd worked toward for years. The house wasn't a mansion, but it had character. Weathered brick, ivy creeping up one side, and best of all, a backyard that felt like a private retreat. Towering oaks lined the fence, casting generous shade through the seasons, while a row of dense evergreen bushes muffled the sounds from the street. Birds nested high above, and in the mornings, sunlight filtered through the canopy like gold dust. I fell in love with the trees instantly. They gave the yard soul, offering privacy, a natural buffer against noise, and a tranquil beauty that soothed my often busy mind. My partner joked that I spent more time tending to the backyard than unpacking inside. It was during the first week in our new home that we met the neighbors, Mark and Linda. They lived in the 2-story house just behind ours, their balcony peeking over the fence line. Our introduction was cordial, though tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Linda had smiled, offered a tin of cookies, and casually mentioned that the previous owners had promised to do something about the trees out back. Her tone was light, but her eyes lingered on the tall oaks behind me. I made a mental note to ask about that later. Promises or not, the trees weren't going anywhere if I could help it. A week later, Mark came by while I was mowing the lawn. He stood awkwardly by the gate, hands in his pockets, squinting past me at the trees. "So, we were hoping you'd consider trimming, or maybe even removing a few of these," he said, gesturing vaguely at the oaks. "They block a lot of our view, especially from the upstairs deck. The previous owners were going to take care of it, but, well, I promised I'd look into it." Later that day, I dug through the closing documents, utility maps, and even called the seller. They laughed softly over the phone. "Absolutely not," they said. "Those trees were half the reason we bought the place ourselves." Armed with facts, I politely declined the request the next day. I explained the trees were fully within our property line and essential to our privacy. Mark smiled too quickly, and Linda waved from their deck without really looking at me. After that, the topic never came up again, or so I thought. 2 weekends later, my partner and I returned from a brief trip to visit family. It had been a refreshing getaway, until we pulled into the driveway and I immediately sensed something was off. From the front, everything looked normal. But as I stepped into the backyard, my stomach dropped. The air felt different, more exposed. Lighter, but not in a good way. I stared, unable to move for a moment. Several of the towering branches that once reached across our yard like arms were gone, jagged stubs left in their place. The carefully pruned canopy now looked butchered, and sunlight beat down onto the grass where there had once been dappled shade. Worse, one of the privacy bushes along the fence line was completely gone, ripped out at the root. A few others had been clipped unevenly, as though someone had worked quickly, without care or knowledge. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, anger welling up like a kettle about to scream. My partner stood beside me, silent at first, before finally whispering, "Who would do this?" But I already knew. The absence of the trees made the neighbor's second-story deck suddenly feel closer, looming, and from their patio, I thought I saw Linda's curtains shift. It wasn't just a violation of property. It felt personal, as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to the peace we'd worked so hard to build. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind whistle through the broken branches, feeling not just exposed, but betrayed. I didn't waste any time. I sent an email to Mark and Linda, asking what had happened to the trees and bushes. The email was straightforward, polite, but also, unmistakably, frustrated. The response came quickly. "Hi there, just wanted to clarify the situation. We had a crew come out to take care of the trees as the previous owners had promised. We figured we'd help you out by taking care of some unfinished business for you. Hope you understand. Best, Mark and Linda." I reread the email twice, my blood running cold. The smugness dripped from each word. They didn't apologize. They didn't offer an explanation. They just assumed they had the right to do whatever they wanted because of some promise that wasn't theirs to claim. There was no misunderstanding here. This wasn't a case of confusion. Mark and Linda had deliberately ignored our boundaries, choosing to take matters into their own hands as though they were entitled to alter our property to suit their aesthetic. I sat back, staring at the screen, realizing the depth of their entitlement. This wasn't just a petty request, it was a deliberate, personal attack. They'd made sure to fix their view, regardless of the cost to us. I knew the damage was too severe for me to handle alone. I called around, scheduling consultations with multiple certified arborists. Each visit confirmed the worst. The trees were valuable, and the damage was extensive. One arborist, a grizzled man named Rick, walked slowly around the yard, shaking his head. "This isn't just bad trimming. This is destruction. The trees have been so heavily pruned, I'm afraid they won't recover. Worse, without proper sanitation, the tools they used could have introduced disease. That's a huge risk." I stood still, trying to absorb his words. The shade and privacy I had cherished were gone, and now the trees, my trees, were at risk of dying, thanks to someone else's reckless hands. Rick went on to explain that the trees' health was compromised, leaving them vulnerable to further damage, and that the potential for disease could spread to the rest of the yard. "They could end up infecting the rest of your property," he warned, "and any other trees on the lot could be in danger now too." My heart sank further. Not only had the neighbors stolen our privacy, but they'd jeopardized the entire yard's well-being. The emotional toll of what they'd done was compounded by the harsh reality that this could get much worse. The next step was obvious. If I was going to fix this, I needed to understand my rights, and I had to start with local tree law statutes. I dove into research, poring over legal articles and city ordinances about property rights and trees. I found out quickly that this was no small matter. In many areas, cutting down or damaging trees without consent can lead to triple damages. And given the scale of the destruction, the law was on my side. The trees weren't just valuable in terms of aesthetics or privacy. They were legally protected. In my research, I also learned that trespassing laws applied here. Mark and Linda had crossed the line by sending a crew onto our property without permission, and their actions were illegal. Their smug, self-righteous attitude only made me more certain. This wasn't a minor issue. I wasn't dealing with a small fine or an apology. I was dealing with something major. I called a lawyer for a consultation. The lawyer, after hearing the details, confirmed what I'd feared. "You have a strong case here. They've caused significant damage. It's not just about the trees, either. You're entitled to compensation for both the destruction and any potential harm to the rest of your property." It was clear now. This wasn't just a dispute over a few branches. It was a full-fledged case of property damage, and I wasn't going to back down. After Rick's grim assessment, I knew I had to get one more expert opinion, so I called in a third arborist, a specialist with decades of experience in diagnosing tree diseases. When he arrived, I watched as he meticulously examined the trees, running his hands over the bark and checking the cuts made by the previous crew. "Your trees are definitely at risk," he told me, his voice calm but firm. "But it's worse than I expected. The cuts were so deep and improperly done that they've opened wounds to disease. I'm seeing early signs of fungal rot in the main trunks. If this isn't addressed quickly, it'll spread." My heart sank as he continued. The untouched trees? They're not safe either. The infection could spread across your entire yard, and it's a matter of time before more of them start showing signs. I felt the emotional weight of his words. This wasn't just about losing shade. It was the dream I had for my home slipping through my fingers. My partner had put so much effort into the backyard. We'd planned garden parties, quiet evenings under the oaks, and lazy afternoons. The dream of a perfect sanctuary was turning into a nightmare. The cost of treating the disease and possibly removing the infected trees added tens of thousands of dollars in damages. Even if the trees could be saved, the emotional toll was impossible to quantify. These trees had been part of my vision, my home, and now they might be gone forever. I was determined to make sure this didn't go unchallenged. I gathered all the documents, the expert reports, the email confession from Mark and Linda, and every photo I had taken of the damaged trees. I compiled it all into a thick file, and with the advice of my lawyer, I began building my case. But then I decided to talk to my neighbors. Maybe I wasn't the only one who had dealt with these people. As I spoke to others in the neighborhood, a pattern quickly emerged. Mark and Linda had a reputation for being difficult. There were reports of racism, false complaints about minor issues, and an overall sense of hostility that had made many residents uncomfortable. In fact, one neighbor, Sarah, who had lived in the area for over a decade, told me that Mark had once tried to demand she remove a fence she'd built without any legal grounds. "They've always thought they could do whatever they wanted," she said bitterly. I was surprised by how many people offered their support. Word of what Mark and Linda had done spread quickly, and the community rallied behind me. Several neighbors even urged me to press charges, expressing their frustration over the couple's history of troublemaking. It was clear now, this wasn't just my fight. The entire neighborhood was backing me up. With the support of the community and the weight of the evidence I had gathered, I moved forward with filing charges. I filed a criminal complaint for trespassing and property damage. Mark and Linda's actions had gone beyond negligence. They had intentionally trespassed on my property, destroyed my trees, and exposed my entire yard to the risk of infection. This was no longer just about a few damaged branches. It was about the integrity of my home. My lawyer also prepared a civil case to seek damages for the destruction of the trees and the cost of treating the disease that was now spreading. The total damages were now approaching $150,000, a staggering amount that would have to be covered by their insurance, or, if they were unwilling to pay, by a court order. As part of the process, the neighbors received the legal notice. When I saw the look on their faces as they opened it, I felt a sense of vindication. They had believed they could do whatever they wanted, but now they were going to face the consequences. It wasn't just about fixing my backyard anymore. It was about standing up for my rights. The legal battle had taken its toll on Mark and Linda. After the court ruled in our favor, their insurance company balked at covering the full extent of the damages. As a result, they were left with a massive financial burden that they couldn't escape. The damages to my trees and property had pushed the case to the brink, and despite their best efforts to negotiate, they were forced to sell their house to cover the costs. The neighborhood, once silent about Mark and Linda's behavior, finally exhaled in relief. Word spread quickly that they had sold their home and were leaving. "Good riddance," many of the neighbors whispered. "They won't be missed." As for me, the feeling of vindication was bittersweet. I had stood up for what was mine, and I had won. But the victory didn't erase the emotional toll. The loss of the trees, the feeling of invasion, of having my sanctuary destroyed, was something I would never fully recover from. Even though I had been right, the yard that had once felt like an escape now felt incomplete, scarred by their carelessness. I still catch myself looking out at the stumps where the trees once stood, a reminder that sometimes Fighting for what's yours doesn't always restore what was lost. Looking back on everything, it all started with a simple request about a view. But what followed was a reminder of how important it is to respect others' property and boundaries. Property lines are not just legal, they're emotional, personal, and there's no excuse for crossing them. Shout out to tree law and the incredible arborists who helped me through this. Without their expertise, I never would have known how deep the damage went. And my final piece of advice? Don't mess with someone else's trees, unless you're ready to lose your own house. That wraps up today's episode of r/Payback. If you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to subscribe for more epic stories.